Welcome to the Explainer. You know, when you look at a map of India, you're seeing so much more than just land and borders. You're actually seeing a story that's been written by water over millions of years. Today, we're going to trace that story, the huge, complex network of rivers that truly defines the Indian subcontinent. It can seem a little complicated, but stick with me, and by the end of this, you'll get a really clear picture of the two great river families that are the absolute lifelines of India.
So, here's our game plan. First, we'll get the basic vocabulary down, so we're all speaking the same language. Then, we'll look at how India's rivers split into two major groups. After that, we'll explore those massive Himalayan systems, then journey south to the Peninsular Rivers. And finally, we'll tie it all together and see why these waterways are just so critical for everything from the economy to the environment.
All right, let's dive in. Before we can even start talking about specific rivers like the Ganga or the Narmada, we've got to get on the same page with three core ideas. Think of these as the absolute building blocks for understanding any river system anywhere in the world.
So, the first term is drainage itself. And honestly, it's just the fancy word geographers use to describe a river system. The easiest way to picture it is like the veins of a landscape. You have all these tiny little streams flowing from different directions. They merge together to form one main river, and that river eventually empties out into a bigger body of water, like a sea or an ocean. Simple as that.
Okay, so if drainage is the system of rivers, what's a drainage basin? Well, it's the entire chunk of land that funnels water into that one single river system. Imagine a huge bowl. Every single drop of rain that falls inside that bowl is eventually going to find its way to the same river at the bottom. And a little fun fact for you, the biggest drainage basin on the entire planet belongs to the Amazon River.
So what keeps one of these giant basins separate from another? That's what we call a water divide. And it's a really simple but super important concept. Just picture the peak of a mountain range. Any rain that falls on one side is going to flow down into River A's basin. And any rain that falls on the other side, that's going into River B's basin. That high ridge, that mountain peak, that's the water divide. It literally divides the flow of water.
All right, we've got the basics down, right? So now we can take these ideas and apply them directly to India. The country's geography is so unique. You've got the unbelievably tall Himalayas up in the north and the really ancient plateau down in the south. And this creates two very, very different families of rivers.
And here they are, side by side. The difference is pretty huge. Himalayan rivers are born way up in the snow-capped mountains. This makes them perennial, meaning they flow all year long, because they're fed by both rain and melting snow and ice. They have a super long journey to the sea, which gives them all this power to carve out deep canyons and carry tons of silt, which they then dump at the coast to form huge deltas. Now the Peninsular Rivers, a totally different story. They start on the much lower plateau, and they're seasonal. They depend almost entirely on the monsoon rains. So their journeys are shorter, their riverbeds are shallower, and they just don't create as many of those dramatic landforms.
So let's start with the giants of the north. We're talking about three absolutely colossal river systems. And these aren't just big on a map. They are right at the center of the history, the culture, and the daily life of northern India. We're talking about the Indus, the Ganga, and the Brahmaputra.
First up, the Indus. This river starts an absolutely epic journey high up in Tibet, near the sacred lake Mansarovar. It flows west, cutting this incredible deep gorge as it enters India in Ladakh. It picks up water from a bunch of tributaries, then keeps going through Pakistan until it finally empties into the Arabian Sea. At almost 3,000 kilometers long, it is truly one of the great rivers of the world. Now, here's a really important detail. Even though a big part of the Indus Basin is in India, a treaty signed back in 1960, the Indus Water Treaty, means that India can only use about 20% of the total water from this system. But let me tell you, that 20% is absolutely vital. It's what supports the agriculture that feeds millions of people across Punjab, Haryana, and Rajasthan. Next, we have the Ganga, a river that is just immense, both culturally and economically. It's officially born when two main streams, the Bhagirathi and the Alaknanda, meet at a place called Devaprayag. Now, what's so cool about the Ganga is that it gets fed from two different directions. It gets water from Himalayan rivers like the Yamuna, but it also gets water from rivers flowing north from the peninsular uplands, like the Sun. All of that water power ends up in the Bay of Bengal, where, together with the Brahmaputra, it forms the Sundabar Delta,
the single largest delta on the entire planet.
And our third Himalayan giant, the Brahmaputra, is really a river with two different personalities. It starts in Tibet as the Sangpo, where it's actually a pretty calm, cold river that doesn't carry much dirt or silt. But then, bam, it takes this dramatic, sharp U-turn around a huge mountain peak and just thunders down into Arunachala Pradesh, India. And here, in a region with tons of rainfall, it completely transforms. It becomes this massive, sprawling river carrying enormous amounts of water and silt. This is great for creating fertile islands, but unfortunately, it also leads to devastating floods every year in Assam and Bangladesh.
Okay, let's shift our focus and head south now to the Peninsular Plateau. And remember what we said? These rivers are a whole different animal. They're mostly seasonal, and their entire existence is dictated by the rhythm of the monsoon rains.
The geography down here is really dominated by one massive feature, the Western Ghats. This is a mountain range that runs all the way down the western coast, and it acts as the main water divide for the entire peninsula. It's basically the gatekeeper that decides whether a river is going to flow east into the Bay of Bengal or take a shorter trip west into the Arabian Sea.
So, this divide creates two really clear paths. Most of the big rivers, we're talking the Mahanadi, Godavari, Krishna, and Kaveri, they all start on the eastern slopes and take a long, slow journey across the plateau, building up big deltas before they hit the Bay of Bengal. On the flip side, the main rivers that flow west, the Narmada and the Tapi, have much shorter, steeper trips to the Arabian Sea. So instead of deltas, they form estuaries, which are these brackish areas where the river's fresh water meets the ocean's saltwater.
Just to give you a sense of scale here, let's look at the Godavari. At about 1,500 kilometers long, it is by far the largest of the peninsular rivers. In fact, because of its size and the huge area it waters, it's often called the Dakshin Ganga, which means the Ganga of the South. That nickname really tells you everything you need to know about how important it is for the region. Of course, there are other major rivers here too. The Narmada and Tapi are super interesting because they kind of break the rules, flowing west through these deep cracks in the earth called rift valleys. You've got the Mahanadi, which flows out through Odisha. The Krishna is a critical water source that's shared between 3 different states, and the Kaveri creates India's second biggest waterfall, which is a huge source of hydropower.
Okay, so we've traced these rivers from the highest mountains all the way to the coast. But so what? Why does any of this geography actually matter in the real world? Well, this is where we connect the dots between the flow of water and the flow of human life, our economy, and the health of our planet.
I mean, their value is just off the charts. Rivers have been the cradle of Indian civilization for thousands of years. Today, they're the absolute backbone of our agricultural economy through irrigation. They act as highways for boats and barges, they generate clean electricity from hydropower, and let's not forget lakes. They act like natural sponges, soaking up excess water to help prevent floods, all while being beautiful places that attract tourism.
But this brings us to the really tough part, the critical challenge we're facing right now. The very same rivers that give us all of this life are in serious trouble. Our growing population and industries are demanding more and more water. And at the same time, a huge amount of untreated sewage and industrial chemicals are being dumped directly into them, which is overwhelming their natural ability to clean themselves.
To really understand how serious this is, you just have to look at the planet's water supply. Over 97% of all the water on Earth is saltwater. Of the tiny 3% that's freshwater, most of that is locked up in ice caps and glaciers. So what's left for us? That little sliver, less than 1% of accessible fresh water in our rivers and lakes. That's it. That's all we have to work with. It is unbelievably precious.
So after all this, it's pretty clear that these drainage systems are so much more than just lines on a map. They are complex, they're fragile, and they are life-sustaining networks. And that leaves us with a really important question we all need to think about. What would our lives, our cities, our entire country actually look like without clean, fresh water? The answer, I think, shows us exactly why we have to protect these resources. Thanks for joining this explainer.